Hello and welcome back to the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. I am your host, Mark Talaga, and today I am very, very excited about our episode, about our topic, about our guest. I think this is going to be an extraordinarily valuable episode for you to listen to because it's an issue that I believe on some way or another affects a large majority of gifted, asynchronous, complex kids. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest, Dr. Christy Washkowiak, and she is an audiologist extraordinaire. She's a pediatric developmental audiologist and auditory processing specialist. She serves as a manager of her Wheaton, Illinois office, the Auditory Connection, which serves the greater Chicagoland area. And there she offers comprehensive diagnostic auditory processing evaluations and direct auditory therapy services for children 5 and older, using a whole brain developmental approach. Dr. Christy holds a certificate in educational advocacy from the ARC at school and enjoys advocating for her clients' educational needs. Dr. Christy's special interests include neurodevelopmental sensory motor integration and asynchronous development in neurocomplex children. And she currently serves on the board of the International Guild of Auditory Processing Specialists. Whoo! Welcome, Dr. Christy.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, 100%. I am just so excited because, in our work here at the center is where I really learned how much auditory processing, central auditory processing issues can affect these gifted kids and the way they do it. It was really like it opened up a whole world to me. So what I'd like from you is tell me a little bit about, let's talk about a little bit about your background with this and why it matters to you and what you like about it, all that stuff.
Sure. Well, it's a really underrepresented area in the field of audiology as a whole. And I felt very ill prepared to help people when I was working in general audiology in a hospital setting. I frequently saw children whose hearing test came out completely normal. And I had to tell the parents, well, there's no problem. They're perfectly fine. The hearing's great. And, sometimes there were still some concerns and, we really didn't know what to do with these kids. Again,
Right.
we had very few referral sources, nowhere to send them. And it's just a very misunderstood area of audiology. And there's a lot of conflicting information. And so I always wanted to do a deep dive. But the truth is, unless you specialize in this area, it's hard to be an expert because there's so much to learn. There's really so much additional science, and it's a complex issue. It's the auditory system is very complex, and then you take into consideration that multiple systems of the brain are really involved in auditory processing, and the developmental piece is such an important factor as well, because we have to look at development starting really in utero, the birth history, early developmental history, to see if kids even really have the proper foundation to support these higher level processing skills. So just I had a whole lot to learn.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And so but I want to underline a few things that you mentioned that I think are wildly important.
Yes.
One being the difference between a child or anybody's ability to hear, like mechanically pick up a beep or a sound or a noise, versus their ability to process. What's the difference?
So I would say one of the ways I explain it is think of the ears as the hardware and the brain as the software. So Dr. Jack Katz, who developed the Buffalo model, which I think we'll be discussing today, he uses the definition that auditory processing is what the brain does with what the ears hear. So really we hear and we interpret that message with our brain. So of course, the aspects of the peripheral or auditory system, that's the part away from the brain, the ear level part, that has to be working efficiently, right? But what we're really talking about for today's purpose, we're talking about kids whose sensitivity is normal. They're able to hear very soft sounds across the pitch range, so there's no loss of acuity or sensitivity. The problem becomes in the somewhere along the line of transmission as the sound leaves the inner ear, travels through the auditory nerve. There's some difficulty in the sound traveling up through the brainstem, up to the cortex and the higher brain. So that difficulty can be due to a neuromaturational problem. Maybe there aren't enough nerve fibers, or maybe those fibers aren't properly myelinated, so those sounds aren't being transmitted as quickly and efficiently as they should. So that's when we get these auditory related challenges, these hearing difficulties that are not due to a loss of sensitivity, but to a lack of efficiency in the brain.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, for a lot of people listening, it may be like, holy smokes, this is like a very complicated, okay. So what, and I want to boil it down to, so what does that mean in the sense of like, how does it manifest in these kids?
So auditory processing disorder really isn't one thing. It really would better be called auditory processing disorders because it's more of an umbrella term. So it's hard to come up with a single definition. But what we do is we look at some of these different areas of the brain that are dedicated to the auditory nervous system. And we're able to see different skills that fall into different categories. And then look at each of those categories, see where the child's deficiency lies. And then our testing will allow us to look at these areas of weakness and gather evidence. So for instance, one of the things we look at is auditory decoding. And that refers to how accurately and quickly the sounds travel to the brain. So, and this really goes down to the individual sound level. Can kids hear the sounds of speech clearly? Do they sound crisp and clean? So, for instance, the sentence, bring me a drink. The child might hear, bring me a brink, because the brain doesn't have a solid representation of the sounds b, b, and d, d. So to them, the sound may sound like something in the middle. And that's a decoding problem. So decoding can look like asking for clarification, asking huh or what, needing repetition, not responding to instructions, or needing multiple, directions. Basically, they're just, it might sound like fuzzy reception of the message. And I explain it to parents like, imagine if you were listening all day long and every other sentence you heard one word in a foreign language, right? So all day long, you're having to listen with extra vigilance and monitor what you're hearing and try to repair what you heard so that it makes sense. That's very tiring and very exhausting. And it leads you to maybe forget what came just before it and then miss what comes after as you try to make sense of it. So, so that would be an example of a decoding deficit.
I got you. And for the, I'm going to take a pause. By the way, you can take a pause anytime you need to like kind of get your thoughts together. Get your sentence out. My producer takes care of it. So I think this relates particularly well to gifted kids because when that glitch happens where they're not hearing a sound, it sounds phonologically fuzzy.
Yes.
They have that tendency to fill in the gaps, and they're smart enough to where they alert to the gist of it, that they say, okay, I got what you said. I figured it out. And so to me, that seems like it could go unnoticed for a long, long, long time before there's a realization. Okay. All right. So I'm on the right
so
track.
If you want to pop in with that now, we can talk a little bit about that if you like. And then there's other categories that we can discuss as well of auditory processing disorder.
Let's talk about, I want to hear the other categories. Let's go there and then we can come back.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. And a second category we look at with the Buffalo model is called a tolerance fading memory deficiency. So tolerance fading memory refers to a couple of different things. First of all, this is where we have kids who can't accurately extract words from background noise. So they're having trouble in noise. Oftentimes they get very dysregulated in noise. They may shut down because it becomes very overwhelming, and also refers to the difficulty holding what you just heard in your short-term memory. So difficulty with short-term auditory memory. So these two kind of get placed together in another category. Okay.
Got it.
Um, then we also talk about integration challenges. And integration on the whole really refers to how well balanced the two hemispheres of the brain are. The two hemispheres of the brain have to be well balanced and coordinated in order to do a lot of tasks efficiently. So, and in particular, tasks that require multiple modalities like auditory visual skills or visual motor skills. So, can the child take notes while they listen, for
Right.
instance? And so, when kids have an auditory integration deficit, this can look like very long delays in responding. It takes them a lot more time to respond because it takes a lot more time to put that message together. They may have dyslexia, more severe reading or spelling challenges, visual processing difficulties, really poor handwriting, and just really difficulty in complex listening situations and environments, and keeping up with, the banter at the lunch table when there are multiple speakers and it's happening really quickly. So that's integration.
Well, right, and
Um,
the fact that it connects to all these different parts of the brain, meaning
yes,
to say, oh, poor handwriting, that connects to their hearing. It's like what? Like how? What are you
absolutely.
talking about? But no, in reality, they all have to. Your hemispheres have to talk with each other. They have to work in alignment. There's got to be that connective piece, and so it's not so clear as they're just being, lazy, or they're maybe it is
Exactly.
dysgraphia. But I gotcha. That's cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And, a lot of these different centers of the brain, they share wiring. And so, and sometimes the wiring between our different brain centers, if it's not strong, and, it's really hard for the kids to integrate these skills. So, yeah,
Got it.
you'd be amazed at what we can see we can talk about symptoms more in detail, but we also have organization challenges, and this just refers to how kids are able to store and recall information, how we store information in the brain. And they may express their thoughts in a disorganized manner. They may have a lot of sequencing issues, have a lot of just overall poor organization of thoughts, and really this goes along with executive functioning challenges oftentimes. So we're seeing a lot of this in asynchronous kids. They have a lot of these kinds of difficulties, but this does
Wow.
show up in the auditory domain as well. And then temporal processing. Can we make sense of the timing and prosodic features of speech? And hear small gaps in sentences that change the meaning of the
Mm.
sentence. So, for instance, if it's a really hot day and you're out taking a walk and you say, oh, look at that hot dog, versus, you're really hungry and you're walking down the street and there's a hot dog stand and you say, look at that hot dog. These things affect meaning, and
Right.
kids with temporal processing challenges can't always derive meaning from these features.
Do you feel like that really relates to that kind of kid who maybe, very emotionally forward, hypersensitive, whatever you want to call it, that when the tone of the speaker is maybe a little more intense or angry, they mishear what's being said because they're just hearing the tone of it? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, they may be more sensitive. They may present as more sensitive because, they can't always understand how the tone changes the message. So they
Right.
may not be able to pick up that someone's sad or pick up that someone's angry. They may miss that entirely. Or they may not be able to put the information they receive verbally, the facts of the message, combine that with that added information you get about, meaning and intent, and kind of the emotional side of it. And so they may kind of miss the big picture, or
Right.
They may be sensitive because they get their feelings hurt because they're not understanding, and their peers, may not quite understand what's going on with them or why they're not getting the message, or they may just feel a little bit out of step with everyone because they're
Right.
not understanding. And that relates
That
to how well we can integrate the information across the two hemispheres, because the right and left hemispheres do different things in relation
right.
to auditory. So the left side is where typically in most brains, although of course that varies as well, but the vast majority of right-handers and about 70% of left-handers have the speech reception portion of the brain in the left hemisphere, and then the right hemisphere is the more creative side, the more musical side, and that's where again we get information about from the prosody and the tone of speech. So,
Wow.
yeah, different parts of the brain doing different things, and they have to be well coordinated.
Yeah, I'm trying to, put myself in the shoes of a lot of parents who's listening who I know they're like, I'm trying to give my kid instructions and they keep saying, "You're yelling at me, you're being mean,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be many things, but
Right.
don't rule out the reality that their ability to hear the data and what you're really saying isn't getting
Mm-hmm.
overridden, or it's, some of these issues that you're bringing up.
Right.
Um, Something to look out for, that it's not so cut and dry as, they're just being overreactive, right?
Right. And when you consider the multiple systems that also affect how we hear, the auditory system and the limbic system, so our emotional system, are very, very highly integrated.
Hmm.
And when we're stressed or anxious, if you're doing homework at the table and things just aren't going well and it's starting to break down, we've all been there.
Yep.
And this, child is kind of started to shift into fight or flight. They're not receiving the message. You can't access your thinking brain if you're in that state. So emotion is highly, highly related to what we take in and process. Our cognitive skills, our attention, our motivation. It all plays such a big role, memory. And
Wow.
so really, one of the reasons I love the Buffalo model is that it leaves room for consideration of all of these things. It's one brain, one child, and we cannot compartmentalize the auditory system. It's
So let's talk
just
about the
so.
Buffalo model.
Mm-hmm,
Sorry to
sure.
interrupt you there, but
Yeah.
yeah. So with the Buffalo model, tell us what's different about it, or why it might be a necessity when evaluating very asynchronous kids that are off the charts in some areas and maybe behind in others.
Sure, sure. Well, the Buffalo model, like I said, was developed by Dr. Jack Katz, PhD. It's been widely used for decades. It is not new by any means, but it has stood the test of time. And the reason for that is that it really is an intervention tool, and combined with a therapeutic program. So it has 49 indicators for auditory processing disorder. We're able to categorize those different challenges or those different deficits into categories, so we can target our interventions. We know where to start and scaffold those skills appropriately. The Buffalo model therapies really prime or ready the brain for anything else to come, or anything else we might do, because we do a lot more than just the Buffalo model. It has its own questionnaire that parents can fill out prior to the evaluation, and then we can look at our findings and cross-check with the parents' observations. And what I really love about it is it's a multi-dimensional test. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is that there are two scoring methods that we use. So there's the quantitative method that's used on, virtually all tests of auditory processing. And that's, was the response correct or incorrect? Was it right or wrong?
Right.
And but really, where so much of the richness and the diagnostic power of the test comes in is in the qualitative analysis. So we do a whole separate analysis of really how the child is responding. So, how they're responding, we can note the struggle behaviors,
Hmm.
and these are really hard to beat. You really can't beat the test when we're looking at these types of factors. A lot of additional calculations where we can identify patterns. They give us so much information about that individual
So
child.
there's something that is really cool that I think we should underline, because the idea is, yes, that the all the factors that it covers, the qualitative, the how long they take to answer. We got to go back to what we said earlier, that
Yes.
sometimes kids are smart enough that if you say, what did you hear me say? And you give them enough space and time, they can kind of reconstruct everything in a way where they can give you the right answer.
Yeah.
But it takes so long
Right.
that it's
Right.
actually, that's the challenge. And the Buffalo model, I think you're saying, is what would catch that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So I can give you an example just so you kind of have a feel for what a qualitative finding is. So let's say the most basic of them would be a delayed response. So let's say that response is so delayed that I have to pause the recording to give the child a chance to respond after every presentation of a test item. That happens. So we call that an extreme delay. So not only can I note that, but I can look at it even further. So let's say that after the delay, or as the child's thinking about the response, they're sort of rehearsing it to themselves or rehearsing it under their breath. And then when they come out with it, it might look something like baseball airplane. So you get that rising intonation, you get the furrowed eyebrows, you get the rehearsing it under their breath. And so I know they're struggling with decoding that message. So that's a decoding sign. Let's compare that to a delay where, there's a pause, child's processing it, and then they come out with baseball airplane. Well, we know it was just late in getting to where it needed to get because they came out with it seemingly effortlessly. It was just delayed. So that's two entirely different patterns, right? So I can take that information and I can add that to my, my look at all the different categories. That's a sign. I can add it in, and when we're done, we count all of these signs, and it can give us a really nice picture of what's happening. And so this is the only test I know of with a multi-dimensional test like this. And certainly we add tests to this. The Buffalo model has 3 different tests in it. We certainly add tests, but this will always, I think, be my core. Always going to go back to this. Yeah.
I mean, it begs the question, why wouldn't you use the Buffalo model?
I don't know. It's like any field. There are different perspectives. I think a more traditional method is a more, it's kind of a yes or a no, right? It's either there's a problem, there's not a problem. And there is no further analysis necessarily of all of the responses. And I think that comes from a more audiocentric view of auditory processing, where it's a view of the auditory system maybe as a little more compartmentalized, a little more modular. And so that's not how I view the auditory nervous system at all. And there's that old, it's kind of arbitrary, but the more traditional model, it's not older, just a more traditional model looks at, for 2 subtests in the battery that are below the mean by 2 standard deviations. Now, to me, that's arbitrary. We're not looking at it like that. We are categorizing evidence. So it's just a really different view. I think the other thing is, when you're treating kids with auditory processing disorder, you kind of are required to look at the whole picture, the whole individual. I mean, families don't come to us for a test. They come to us for help. They come to us to help solve a problem and to help their kids and to eliminate some struggles. They're not coming, for standard deviations. So even though I calculate those things, I'm trying to give families answers. And I think, a big difference is Dr. Jack Katz is not only a researcher and a scientist, he's a therapist. At 80 years old, he's still seeing clients. And so he understands the big picture. He wasn't only in a laboratory, he was working with kids. And, what I see in providing therapy is I just see the change. I see the improvement in the quality of life, the ease we can give kids, and just how much we can take off their plate and sort of just turn down the temperature in the nervous system and make life a little easier, a little smoother. And
The-
so that's where I guess maybe where the difference lies. I'm not sure.
no, I think, yeah, from what I'm understanding of what you're saying, that maybe yes, you have an extreme case where you just need a yes or no, maybe, and then
Right.
sure you go a more traditional model. But with the clientele that I work with, and with the people that are listening to this podcast, it's something I try to preach over and over again. You need to meet complexity with complexity, meaning
Exactly.
the more asynchronous and unique your child is, where nothing really tends to make sense, you better match that with an assessment and evaluation that looks for that and can create patterns and coding out of it that helps you understand things diagnostically, so that you
Definitely.
can do the work that would be effective. I love it.
Agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we're only
So
seeing more and more, I think, really what is neurotypical anymore. I don't,
I say it all the time.
I don't know. So I think we're, I think that this is where we are, and we have to look at the big picture. We don't have a choice.
So let me take it to an extreme then, and just see what your reaction is. What
Yep.
about the idea that every kid, that whether they qualify as gifted or not, they're just a little out there, whatever, asynchronous, how you want to call it, shouldn't every single one of them have auditory processing assessment done?
Yeah, ideally. I mean,
Okay.
if you have a speech and language disorder, I believe so. If a child has had a history of otitis media, that's a huge, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Developmental, any little quirk in early development. We've got so many developmental red flags that seem to translate to, well, we know they do, to auditory processing challenges and visual processing challenges, and all,
Yeah.
higher order processing. So auditory needs to be in there. Absolutely. And that's why
Wow.
we are so, focused on meeting with families before the evaluation to get a really thorough history, because many times no one has done that. No one's looked at it that way. And families say
Right.
that to me all the time. Well, how come no one ever put this together before? Or no one's ever asked me that. Or, something as simple as, can your child put their head back to wash their hair? And they say, no. How did you know that? That's really
Wow.
random. Well, it's not. It's not, if you understand the development of, the sensory motor system and understand vestibular development. So balance and vestibular function plays in it too. So it's a really something we have to look at, I think, closely.
You mentioned off mic that there was this really interesting connection between being treated for an auditory processing disorder that helped a child eat better. Explain what
Yeah,
you were saying about that.
right.
I loved it.
Yes, yeah. So, I see some of the some of the strangest benefits. People come back to me and say, "Wow, could this be the auditory processing therapy? This is weird." And it's not so much. I'll say, I want to make it clear. It's not that I'm treating. I'm not treating reading. I'm not treating kids who. I'm not treating a problem with food texture or sensitivity.
Right.
But when we can give kids back, some brain space, and their cognitive resources aren't so depleted, they're not in cognitive overwhelm, maybe their attention isn't as taxed, they're not as fatigued. It's amazing what can happen. I had a family, a teen I was treating, and he just had a lot of quirks, sensory quirks, one of which was, if he went through the drive-through, he had to scrape all the toppings off his burger if they gave it to him, and then he wouldn't even be able to eat it. He'd just say, nope, they're remnants, I can still taste it, I can't have it.
Yep.
And so during therapy, they went through and they put the wrong toppings on, and he scraped it off, and he and his mom said he just ate it. And they both kind of just looked at each other and said, what was that? Because
Wow.
I have to assume that, we're just more regulated, when we're not as constantly in fight or flight, when we're not
Right.
constantly stressed, when we don't have the need to control as much about our environment, and the situations we put ourselves in, when we have some ease, that, a lot of interesting things can happen. So, and that's why I know the system's changing, the nervous system is changing.
Yeah, oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I want parents to react to it in the way I'm reacting to it, which it's like everything has a context. Every
Right.
behavior, everything, is has a purpose to it, a function to it. Even if we're like, what in the world are we doing here, or
Yeah.
why is this so difficult? And when you really drill down into what a person needs and how you can relieve some stress and anxiety, and how you go from being hyper vigilant to make sure you're catching everything because you don't even realize how hard you're working,
Yes.
to that not being there anymore. We've seen things in our practice where sleep gets better. They're not so wound up at
Yes.
night, and initiation of sleep gets. So again, there's a lot of things that I think people never associate with the ability to process the information that they're taking in auditorily. And I think this is
Absolutely.
fascinating.
And
Yeah.
I would say that, most students will not report they have difficulty hearing. Some will. Some will say, I'm just not understanding my teacher. That happens. But more often than not, they say, my hearing's fine. The audiologist said my
Right.
hearing's fine. I'm not having, and especially some of my, gifted students just are adamant they don't have hearing problems. But then we go through the test and we really start to talk, and they kind of start to say, okay, I kind of get what you're saying. Yeah, that is my experience. So, it is very, very interesting. And that's why if we're seeing motor quirks, if we're seeing, extreme fatigue or a change in stress levels or some depression, or if we're having some isolating, where kids may not want to do as much socially or not feel like engaging as much, it could be because they've kind of reached that tipping point
Mm.
where they can't compensate anymore. And it seems to happen sort of at random sometimes. For whatever reason, it's the load has just gotten to be too much.
Right.
Oftentimes when they reach a level where they don't have the vocabulary anymore, so it's
Makes sense.
oftentimes, and that can be in the later grades with gifted kids. I
Right.
mean,
Oh yeah.
the extent of their background knowledge, special interest areas, they may have all that science vocab, or social studies vocab. And so it may take hitting a class where there's new vocabulary where they haven't heard it before, so they can't fill in those blanks. And all of a sudden we're in, cognitive overwhelm because it's just too much. And then we can have
Right.
any of these things, the somatic symptoms, or any of the things I've just mentioned. So, or foreign language, that can be the very first time we'll see an academic issue. It might be the first class, a student can't get an A in. I get that over and over again. And that can be the subtle sign. So it can be
Yeah.
very subtle. And then a lot of times we just don't know until we take a look.
So the idea is we're starting to connect some dots for people about what are some things you could look at, or behaviors that you might want to look at a little differently under the
Yes.
guise or through the lens of auditory processing.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other things that parents can assess for? For example, I know one of the things we look at is when we ask a child a question, if they look
Mm-hmm.
right to mom or dad every
Right.
time when I ask them, we kind of log that away as there's something about taking that in, and they might be anxious or whatever, but like we,
Sure.
we try to look for things like that. What else can you think of that they can look for?
Yeah. So, I'll say, first of all, that it may be invisible to others. So
Okay.
that's really important to note. So teachers or parents, it may not be visible whatsoever. But I would say, change in ability to keep up, especially schoolwork, if they're having more difficulty than usual completing schoolwork, if they're reporting, feeling out of step with peers, if the parents are reporting there's just something off, can't quite keep up, can't quite do the banter, can't pick up on jokes or subtleties,
Hmm.
just not quite, something's just a little bit off. Sometimes there's some teasing, it may be good natured, but friends saying, you say words wrong. You say words wrong, or you keep saying what, or, I had a parent mention that her daughter, some friends they'd gone to a movie, and they saw Top Gun, and the student was saying Maverick, like Maverick. And everyone's like, why do you keep saying Maverick? That's not that's not how you say it. That's weird. Why do you always say things weird? So they may actually say certain sounds differently because they hear it
Right.
differently, or they may
Right.
just ask the same thing, like they've asked, where are we going on vacation 15 times, and the parents are like, we've
Yeah.
discuss this, you know.
Yeah,
So
right. We're ready to cancel this vacation.
right,
But yeah, I
exactly.
gotcha. Yeah.
So just not quite. Something's just a little off.
That makes sense. So I'm going to throw some other examples that we've seen,
Yeah.
and you tell me if I'm on the right track or not.
Right.
So sometimes we assess for between the ages of 0 and 2 or 0 and 3, where there are a large history of ear infections or
Yes.
tubes. Like, would
Hmm.
that be a contributor? Okay.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, big time. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we try to look for that as well. And then the idea that when they're in like a large gymnasium or at a parade, they tend to cover their ears. Is that pretty
Yes.
common? Okay.
Yeah. So we do see some sensitivity. They may not like to have their faces or their ears touched physically,
Mm.
so they may not like to have headphones on. We'll see that. And then, yes, being sensitive to louder sounds or everyday sounds even can be really uncomfortable for them. The toilet flush is a big one. Sometimes they're
Oh, wow.
scared by it. And that can even go back again to some delayed motor milestones, some of the
Mm.
fears. If our motor milestones are delayed, a part of our auditory system called the non-classical pathway can be overactive. So we can see that sensitivity. And I had one recently, a little child who really could not go to the park. Her mom couldn't take her to
Mm.
the park because she could not tolerate babies crying. So if she was anywhere where a baby was crying, she just completely lost the ability to self-regulate. And they had gotten to the point where they didn't leave the home. So this can be a big problem.
God forbid they had another kid.
Right?
was
I know.
just thinking, like,
Believe
oh
me.
no.
I thought exactly.
That's
Exactly.
I mean, that complicates a lot of things if you think about it. I mean, holy smokes.
It's everything.
Yeah.
Your ability to move about in the world.
Wow. Wow.
So and the other thing is, we don't want kids to block out sound all the time with headphones,
Oh.
because that can cause increased sensitivity, because the brain is then being deprived of sound, and the central nervous system turns up the central gain. So it actually can make it worse. So
Interesting.
sound avoidance is really not the solution to that at all. So we can work
Okay.
on different methods of nervous system regulation. There's a program we do called the Safe and Sound program. That's a vagal nerve stimulator, an acoustic vagal nerve stimulator.
That's
So it
interesting.
can help kids to regulate their nervous system. So sometimes we just need to work on calming the system a little bit, but we don't want to overcompensate with the headphones.
So good to know, because that, I think a lot of parents might rely on. Well, we have to bring the anxiety down, and so let's just have
Yes.
this as a go-to. And when maybe that's not always the most appropriate thing.
Right.
And then it has me thinking about: are there exercises or free resources or programs that basically anybody could tap into that you would just feel like blanket is a helpful thing?
Yeah, I would tell parents a couple of things. One would be to check out Masgatova, Masgatova. I believe it's .com.
Okay.
And that refers to Svetlana Masgatova, who is really an expert on reflex integration, sensory motor reflex integration. And she has a lot of resources for parents. In fact, they have a new program out called the archetype movements. And
Okay.
Kids can do some exercises along with the videos. And these are exercises to help develop and mature the central nervous system of children, and help bring back or scaffold, rescaffold the system, so that we can better learn. We have better self-regulatory skills. Stress goes down, and so that kids can get out of the brainstem and get some electricity up to the cortex. So
Wow.
it's this reflex integration is really a great thing to look into. There's also a provider directory on the Masgatova website. So a lot of parent resources on there. For older kids, I would say school age kids and teens, the movement program is a
Okay.
really great program. So it's just movementprogram.com, and it's relatively inexpensive, and it works on beat and rhythm competency
Hmm.
along with some different motor movements that help to integrate any primitive reflexes that may be retained. And so that's a great program. And I
Wow.
really suggest the whole family do it together if you can, because it benefits everyone, even adults. I mean, I have adults with some executive function challenges who, frankly, also probably have auditory processing disorders. They
Right.
bring the kids in and they say, well, this sounds like it might be great for me. And then they do it together and everyone benefits. So,
No,
but
I
it's
love
research,
that.
evidence based, and has been shown also to improve academics. So, reading scores go up, test scores go up,
Oh,
right,
cool.
self-regulation goes up, attention goes up, processing skills go up. There's just, I mean, it's just wonderful.
I'm going to go ahead and link all of those things on our page and on this episode as well. So if you guys are interested and just kind of zip by it, you'll have those links available because I think that's a wonderful resource. And I like the idea of incorporating it as not just it's a you issue, Johnny.
Yes.
It's a system issue. It's a thing we can all work on, all build up together. And it probably affects all the family members, but maybe some are a little better at hiding it than others,
Oh, without
which we
doubt.
can
I
find.
mean, we're
Yeah,
all too
right.
addicted to our phones. We could all stand, even the archetype movements I mentioned, those are early movements. Those movements are great for everyone, and yeah, and especially if there's been a big stress in the family or something, traumatic has happened, we need to go back to those movements. That's really supportive for the
Right.
nervous system. So when our kids
I
are
love it.
stressed and anxious, go back to the movements.
I love it. And movement's key, action's key,
Mm-hmm.
and even the being on beat and rhythm and the musicality of it all. I like
Yes.
how it all works together. That's
It all
cool.
works together. So there's some in the movement program. There's some marching and clapping and keeping to the beat, and that's a really easy way to see if your child has some beat and rhythm competency. Can they march on the spot? A
Right.
lot of kids can't lift a knee and swing the opposite arm,
Right.
so it's important.
Right. So the other thing that I want to touch on that we kind of talked about a little bit, but we're basically connecting a lot of different issues that we see and how they might relate to the auditory center of the brain. What about reading? That one feels like a big
Yes,
one.
it's huge. So auditory processing serves as the foundation for speech, language, reading, spelling, and writing. So, about 70% of kids with a significant reading challenge have auditory deficits. So, if your child has reading deficits, I would absolutely consider an auditory processing evaluation, because
Okay.
you have to have the auditory skills in place to effectively scaffold those skills. And in fact, again, and even prior to the auditory skills, we need to have the sensory motor skills. So there is one reflex in particular called the ATNR, and it's called the reading reflex. Some people call it the
Hmm.
reading reflex because if that reflex is retained, oftentimes we'll see reading challenges. And so, again, going back to movement as really
Wow.
key. Yeah.
You got 70%. Did you guys catch that? That's that is a big old number.
It's
Because
huge.
I do see that a lot where these kids will come in and the parents will give the same kind of story, which is when they were younger, they were voracious readers. They couldn't get
Yes.
enough. And then something shifted and they never want to read at all, or reading seems like a challenge or a struggle. And in the back of my head, it's kind of like, well, there could be, auditory processing, or because the challenge of the vocabulary got to a level where it's not as solid.
Yes.
I'm sure you could explain it better, but I always felt that was the connection there.
Definitely. And
Could be.
oftentimes kids have no problem with the reading fluency part. I mean, some of
Right.
the kids I see do, of course, but they may be very fluent readers or hyperlexic. So they may have started reading at a very, very, very young age.
Right.
And that, doesn't always translate to good comprehension.
Right.
So reading comprehension is often a challenge because, again, it's harder to get the who, what, where, when, why of a situation when we have auditory processing deficits, especially some of these higher order like the integration deficit
Right.
we discussed. And so it can be hard to get the big picture. It can be hard to sequence stories if a child has difficulty, if they read a passage, if they can't sequence the events. These are all signs. So the reading, it's really a huge. I mean,
Okay.
can't.
That's good. I
Yeah.
want my parents to hear that.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about, the hope of it all. The idea
Yes.
that if this is caught and then diagnosed or assessed for, what is the, what are the results of going through therapies and the help that you guys provide?
Sure. So the good news is auditory processing disorder is very, very treatable. And again, we're going to target that intervention. We're going to take that information we gathered from our Buffalo model testing and any other testing we did, and we're going to develop a plan for that individual child. And we're going to see, do we have a solid motor foundation to support these skills, or do we need to go and tackle that first for a bit? And sometimes we do that. Or are we ready to jump in with some auditory, and then I can maybe provide some additional support or provide some at-home exercises. And so it's deficit specific, and usually within about 12 to 15 weeks, that's one round of therapy. And oftentimes that's all we need at an hour a week. Now, sometimes if there are more of the more complicated integration type of deficits, we may need an additional round of therapy to work on target that specific area more. But it can be, as little as 12 weeks. And sometimes we start to see improvements. It varies, child to child, but about halfway through, we may start to notice some differences. And those differences it may not be, I'm hearing better. It may just be, been in a much better mood, much more willing to do extracurriculars after school, doesn't fight me, to go do things on the weekends, or more willing to go out with friends, or fewer naps, or fewer headaches. It may look like that.
Sounds invaluable to me.
Yeah, right.
That's amazing.
So it's, really a quality of life issue. So, and improve grades. They start doing better on their oral exams. If there are, exams that can be really tricky, for kids. And just catching more, because they also have trouble with fast speech, the rate of speech.
Right.
So they might start to catch more. I've heard a lot of maybe a child won't say they have a hearing issue, but they'll say my teacher talks too fast.
Right. Or has maybe a thick accent.
An accent, accented.
Could be very
absolutely.
difficult as well.
That can make it much more difficult. So sometimes, it's interesting. Again, the initial benefit that starts to be reported to me can look like a lot of different things. It's not always just I'm hearing better, but it's that too. And, we certainly see it. And, we can always make improvement. It's
right.
Yeah.
Right. There's always something to scaffold for. Right.
Always. I can't always promise perfection, but we always get benefit. And, we're really looking to have enough benefit that there are no symptoms anymore, but that's our goal. So.
Well, I got to say, Dr. Christy, you provide such a valuable service. I really appreciate you being on the show. Tell people out there that are interested in learning more, or how can they find you?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm fortunate to work with a partner. Her name is Dr. Donna Turetkin. And Dr. Donna works out of Texas. So she serves Texas. She's actually in the San Antonio area. And as you mentioned, I'm in the Chicago area. And our website is auditoryconnection.com. And you can check there and see a little more about our specific services and a little more about us. And we do provide teletherapy services in addition to in-person. I always prefer to see my kids in person, but we do have the option, because unfortunately, people will find it may be hard to locate a provider near them. So we do offer teletherapy. Right now it's Illinois, but hopefully we're working towards some interstate agreements so we can reach some other states as well. Hopefully we'll see that in the future. We have an 800 number, which is 1-800-959-4242. 1791. And I'm at extension 2. You can get Dr. Donna at extension 1. We are always happy to answer questions or just discuss your concerns. You can also email me at Dr. Christy, DrChristy, at auditoryconnection.com and get more information if you like. And right now we do not have much of an online presence, but we're looking hopefully soon. Hopefully that's soon to come.
There you go.
But yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, that's great. So please, we'll leave all that contact info through the show episode link and on our Instagram as well. So I really want to thank you for your time. I learned an incredible amount, and I'm sure the parents did too. If there are any more questions, you can always go to hopelesslygifted.com and send us a note there in case we missed something or something got brought up that we didn't touch on. And I'm sure I could collaborate with Dr. Christy here to find an answer for you guys.
Absolutely.
But I want to thank you again, and I really appreciate your time being here on the podcast.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.